In this video, we will show you how to replace your driver's side exhaust manifold on this Chevy Silverado with a 4.3-liter engine. This will be located along the driver's side of your engine. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Something that we need to mention is to remove the manifold, you're going to have to remove the steering shaft. Make sure you're in a safe area to do so. With that said, let's make our way into the passenger compartment. In the passenger compartment, we'll be tying off the steering wheel. You can use a rubber strap for this. Let's make our way into the engine compartment. We'll be looking at the steering shaft. Halfway down that steering shaft, you're going to find a 15mm through bolt. It's important not to remove this unless you have tied off that steering wheel first. Inspect your mounting hardware. Go ahead and set that aside for now. Follow the steering shaft down to where it connects to the power steering rack. You're going to find an 11mm pinch bolt. We'll remove that pinch bolt and carefully remove the steering shaft from the power steering rack. Give the power steering rack and shaft a quick inspection and set that steering shaft aside. Commonly, to get the steering shaft off of the rack, you may have to use a small pry bar and a hammer, and we'll just try to separate the two ears. While being careful not to cause any damage, with that area gently separated, we'll go ahead and lift this up and out of place. There's that. Let's inspect the rack here. That looks good. Take hold of that shaft and remove it. Once you have that out of the vehicle, the next thing you need to do is give it a close inspection, especially along the joint area. If it feels like it's binding or it's loose in any way, you need to go ahead and replace this shaft. This one looks fine, so I'll go ahead and clean it up and set it aside. Continue on to your spark plug wires. You'll find that you have 3 of them. Now for the spark plug wires themselves, they do connect onto the spark plug, but first we're going to pay attention to the mounting points for these. For these, they're typically held in place with a plastic mounting piece. It looks like a couple of ours are broken and somebody used a wire tie, so I'm just going to cut the wire ties. Otherwise, use a small pocket screwdriver to carefully break these free. There we are. Let's get this leftover wire tie out of here. We don't need it. Give the clip a close inspection. Move along to removing the spark plug wire from the spark plug. Now, when you go to remove these, it's a good idea to mark these in some way so you remember exactly where each one of them goes. Typically, it's easy enough to just look at the length of the wiring. If you find it's a short wire, it's more than likely not going to reach all the way up to the front here. But you could have an issue towards the rear there. To remove the spark plug wires from the spark plug, go ahead and take hold of that area closest to the spark plug, give it a little twist, and pull it off of there. Typically, you can remove these by hand. You may have to use some specialty pliers. Go ahead and give that a quick inspection for corrosion. Make sure it's not damaged in any way. We'll set this wire aside for now. Continue down the line. Same exact process for the other 2. There's that 3rd one. Of course, a quick inspection here. We'll set that aside. With those wires disconnected, let's carefully make our way under the vehicle. Now, underneath the driver's side of the vehicle, we'll be looking for that exhaust manifold. Down here, you can see that we do have our Y pipe attached to here. We're going to have to remove these 3 15mm headed mounting nuts. If you need to, you could apply heat to these mounting nuts. At this point, you should be able to take hold of the pipe and move it up and down. Once you've got it to the point that you can lower your Y pipe, continue on up under the hood. Back under the hood, I want to remove this bracket. Looking along this side, you're going to find a 13mm headed mounting bolt. Go ahead and remove that, and then we can take the bracket and the wiring and slide it out of our way. With that dislodged, let's make our way across the bracket to this wiring harness. Use a small pocket screwdriver to dislodge this area. There we are. At this point, we can pull the wiring harness towards the master cylinder and the bracket towards the engine. Follow this small wire down to its wire connector here. Grab on the small tab along the top, and we'll pull this out of place. A quick inspection for corrosion and set that aside. With that out of the way, we have a clear view of the manifold. Continue on with the deep 14mm. Along the front, you're going to find a 14mm headed mounting stud, and as you continue towards the rear, you'll continue on by finding 14mm headed mounting bolts. Let's start removing each of these. Inspect your mounting hardware, replace it as necessary. We'll go ahead and clean this up and set it aside. We've got this one out. Let's pause on the center bolts and make our way all the way to the rear. For this bolt, you're going to be continuing with a 14, but what you're going to find is you have a little bit more access to this bolt. Use a swivel if necessary. If you're using a long ratchet, you may find that you lose out on some swing. Go ahead and remove this vacuum hose by squeezing the ears of this clamp, slide the hose out of place, and give it a quick inspection. Go ahead and set that aside. There we are. Nice. Nice. Let's continue on doing the exact same thing to all other bolts. We'll remove this shield, give it a quick inspection. Now that we have that shield out of the way, let's take that bolt and start it in just a couple threads. We don't want that tight, we just want it in there. At this point, we're going to continue on to our final 14mm headed mounting bolt. Keep in mind, this is the last thing holding the manifold in place. Don't let it fall and potentially hurt you. There we go. Remove the gasket, set that aside. Before you can continue removing your manifold from the area, we're going to have to remove two 10mm headed bolts that hold the spark plug wire bracket to the engine. There's one along the front and there's one all the way along the back there. Just pop that out of there, give it a close inspection, start it back in a couple threads. Make your way to that rearward bolt. For this one, we're going to completely remove it. At this point, you can pivot this bracket. If you need to, you can fully remove the bracket. Typically, you don't necessarily have to. As we lift this up and out of place, be extremely careful for each one of your 3 spark plugs along the driver's side here. Oh yeah. There it is, friend. With the manifold out of the way, we'll continue on to fully removing that 10mm headed bolt, and then we can take the rest of this bracket and we'll just hang that aside. With the bracket out of the way, let's continue on with a sanding block. We need to go ahead and scuff up the engine to make sure there's no miscellaneous debris. Something to pay attention to when doing this, you want to be extremely careful not to get anything inside of any of the engine ports. Looking in this area, I can tell that I have a nice smooth surface. I'm going to pause in this area, make my way to the rearward port. Same process. With the area sanded down, we'll continue on with some compressed air inside the ports for the mounting bolts and the ports leading into the engine. Keeping in mind that we're being careful not to blow anything into the engine, we're trying to blow any debris out. Moving from the engine, let's pay attention to our exhaust pipe. For this, you're going to find that you do have a circular gasket that you need to remove. Once you've done so, continue on to cleaning up that flange, make sure it's a smooth surface, and install your brand new gasket. Get this new gasket in place. With this gasket in place, let's continue on to cleaning the threads on our mounting bolts and we can prepare for installation. Okay, let's get ready to install our brand new exhaust manifold. Carefully take this and put it down inside your engine compartment. We don't need to put it up against the engine yet, just get it down close to being in the proper placement. Careful for each of those spark plugs, we don't want to cause any damage. There we are. Just rest this right down in here. Let's have a look at our gaskets. You'll find that one side of the gasket has a metallic looking surface. The other side not so much. We'll have the metallic looking surface facing towards the brand new exhaust manifold. The gasket that has the two ports is the forward side here, and the single port is for the rear of the manifold. Now a simple trick to be able to hold the gaskets in place, if you have a couple wire ties laying around, we'll use 2 wire ties for the front gasket. We're only going through the center ports here, and we're going to leave this nice and loose. Just a couple clicks there. All right, swing this out of the way. For the rear gasket, we'll make sure that we have the metal surface facing towards the manifold, of course. And if you were to look at the gasket edges, you'll find that one of the ears is squared off and the other one is rounded. We want to have the rounded port facing towards the rear of the vehicle. When we go to install this one, we're going to be putting the wire tie through the forward port. Of course, this rearward gasket can move around quite a bit, but that's okay because as we lift this manifold into position, we'll be starting with the rearward mounting bolt and then continue on to the forward mounting stud. After we start each of those in, we'll continue on. With the manifold close to being in place, we'll start with the front stud here. I'm going to put it through the manifold, through the gasket, and then I'm going to bring it up towards the engine here. We'll start this in by hand. That first one started in. Let's make our way towards the rear. We'll make sure that we align our gasket and put in the rearward mounting bolt. Let's take another bolt. temporarily start it in through this port, just a couple threads here. Remove these 2 wire ties. Now we can install our forward heat shield. Make sure you have it in this position so that the rounded area is facing towards the front of the vehicle. We'll get this in position and put both of the mounting bolts through there, start those in, and then we can remove that bolt just to the rear of here. When you put these shields in position, make sure you can see the spark plugs inside of the heat shield area. All right, that one's in there loosely. Get this one out of here again. Now we can continue on to our larger shield here. We'll get this in place. Once again, we're starting each one of those bolts in by hand. You do want to make sure you align that rearward gasket. It's possible it fell down a little bit. Now we're going to snug down each one of the bolts. You don't need to make them tight. We're going to torque each of these to 11 foot-pounds the first time around. When we go to snug these, let's make sure we're starting from the center and make our way out. Now we'll torque this to 22 foot-pounds, same sequence. One more time. With all of the mounting hardware tightened up here, let's make our way down to the lower mounting hardware for the manifold to the Y pipe. We'll continue on with our 3 locking mounting nuts. Go ahead and start those on, bottom them out, and then torque those to 37 foot-pounds. Let's do one more pass on that, just to confirm everything's torqued as needed. Back up in the engine compartment, let's continue on with our spark plug wire bracket. Rest that in place. Start in each of your two 10mm headed mounting bolts and go ahead and snug those up. Now it's time to reconnect our spark plug wires. Make sure you have them in the same specific order as when you had removed them. When you press these in, you want to give them a little click, give them a tug, make sure they're secure. Continue on down the line. There we are. Double check, make sure that one's secured. Make our way to the front spark plug wire here. Nice. With those wires in place, the next thing you want to do is make sure that you do secure them. If you need to, make sure that you use a wire tie. You do not want to leave these hanging around where they could potentially get damaged. Double check each one of these wires. Like I said, you do not want them hanging around where they could potentially get damaged. Just trim off the excess of this wire tie. Perfect. Let's get this on here. Reconnect our coolant temp sensor. Press it in, listen for a click, make sure that's secured. Let's move up from there, and we're going to reconnect our vacuum line. Slide this into place, press it in as far as you can, and re-secure it with the clamp. Make sure you can see hose on both sides of that clamp, and then we'll give this a little tug to make sure it's secured. Make your way to your steering shaft. When you go to reattach your steering shaft, it's a good idea to make sure that you clean and inspect both sides of the ports and put some copper anti-seize. Let's take this shaft and put it in position. I'm going to start up along the top first. Slide that up as far as possible. Make our way down towards the bottom. We'll slide it onto the power steering rack. At this point, we're going to have to continue pressing this down so we can put our pinch bolt through the lower area here. Start this in. If you find you have a hard time putting in the pinch bolt, you may have to raise or lower that shaft a tiny bit. Now that that one is started in, let's make our way up to the top mounting bolt. Start this bolt through. Start on that winged nut on the far side there, closest to the engine. Continue on to bottoming out each one of these mounting bolts. Starting down at the bottom, we'll bottom it out, and then we'll torque that to 35 foot-pounds. Make your way up to that upper mounting bolt, bottom that out, torque it to 37 foot-pounds. Let's get this bracket in place. The bracket itself will go underneath your upper radiator hose. Get that aligned. Start in your 13mm headed bolt and snug it up. Double check to make sure that's completely secure. The hose is above the bracket. Now we'll make our way over to the wiring harness. For this wiring harness, you do want to make sure you have it secured, so we'll put it inside of its mounting clip here. Swing that around and press it together. There we are. Give it a tug to make sure that's completely secured in place. To do the passenger side manifold, it's essentially the same process, an exception of you don't have that steering shaft in the way, you don't have to worry about the coolant temp sensor, but you do have to remove the air intake system. Aside from that, you just go ahead and dismount it from the engine and that lower pipe there and remove it from the vehicle. Okay friend, we fully installed our exhaust manifold. At this point, you want to go inside the passenger compartment. Remove that strap from around your steering wheel. Start up the vehicle, let it run for a little while, make sure you have no exhaust leak. After that, go ahead and close the hood, take your vehicle for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.